Hey guys, welcome to another Game Explained discussion. I'm your host, Andre Seegers, and this time we're joined by Roger from Rogers Base and John from Nomcoms to discuss our reviews of Super Mario Odyssey. Now, since people have only begun to play the game, we're going to try and avoid any major spoilers in part 1 of our discussion. But we'll be back soon with part 2 to discuss everything else. And with that, let's get started. Alright guys, so Super Mario Odyssey is coming out now, and the reviews also just went out. And they seem to be pretty good. I don't know, it seems like there's just a little bit of excitement about this game. Maybe it's just me. No, clearly this game is blowing up. The reviews, if anything, I think are even better than Breath of the Wild. I know they at least were from me, and they seem to be across the board, and Breath of the Wild is already insane. I thought it'd be fun to get together and talk about what makes this game so good. John, I know yourself gave it a perfect rating on your scale. We did as well. We gave it a whole new rating we've never given before. And Roger, you don't give scores, but it sounded like you were also pretty positive about this game.
Absolutely, of course. Yeah.
So let's get into it right away then. Like, what makes this game so good? Like, why is Super Mario Odyssey blowing up the charts? What makes this game what it is? What is so good about Mario Odyssey?
I think for me, Mario Odyssey kind of represents, for the Switch, Mario 64. So, like, the Switch now has Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey, which are system-defining games. And, you know, N64 had that, both Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, and I think for me, it feels like the evolution of that, and it's the first time, really, that a 3D platformer has been this open. And it's that freedom mixed with how good it is to run around in this game. Like, it's simply fun to jump in Mario Odyssey.
Just getting around it in any way is fun in this game.
Absolutely. And you can get moons in so many different ways too. Like, for instance, you might see a moon in the distance, and you could try long jumping over to it by clambering up certain parts of the environment, or you could capture a bullet bill, or you could just try and do some insane jumps. I think it's just the amount of options and approaches to this game that makes it so special for me.
Roger, if you're not, in fact, I believe you're not even that big of a Mario fan, at least compared to myself, for instance, right?
No, I mean, not at all. Yeah.
It's like, that's interesting.
Yeah, so for me, my previous favorite in the franchise is Galaxy, and I'd say that now Odyssey has matched Galaxy.
Wow.
In terms of my favorite game in the franchise. I mean 3D, I don't include the 2D ones, because, like, Mario World's classic, and no matter how good whatever new games come out, like, Mario World's always going to be Mario World, but, like, the original one, I mean. But in terms of the 3D ones, yeah, I feel like they've just progressively been getting better, and I know not everybody agrees with me, but, like, I loved 64, and then I liked Sunshine more than 64, and then I liked Galaxy more than Sunshine, and now I like this as much as Galaxy. So it's like, I feel they just keep evolving on each other. And I think the thing I love most about Odyssey is, like, the sense of discovery you get, and, like, the sense of wonder and exploration. I feel that's something that maybe some people are kind of touching on in their reviews, but I really do think it's important. It's like every other Mario game up to this point, right? You get the 120 stars, and then there's, like, extra stuff afterwards, or maybe you get the same stars but they're remixed, or you play as Luigi or whatever. And now in this one, it's literally like you get up to the final boss, and then it's like, oh, it's just a fourth of the game. You've only completed a fourth of the game. Here's all this other content. And I really appreciated that. And I also think it's really cool because then it allows people to go through the game their own unique way. They could jump between kingdoms. They don't necessarily have to go, you know, in a direct order. There's certain instances where, like, the game will guide you, but on the whole, if you want to go back and get more moons, you can go to whatever kingdoms you want. And in that sense, it's a lot like Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild kind of opened up the world of Zelda, and this has opened up the world of Mario, and I think it does just as good of a job, if not better.
And that's a particularly apt comparison with the fact that there are almost as many moons in this game as there are Korok seeds in Zelda.
So, according to, I think, Dan Reichert, there's 905 power moons in the game.
So just over Korok.
So just over Korok, because we had heard previously, me and Andre were talking about this, that it was 883, and I got that number from you, and then somebody else sent me a screenshot, and yeah, apparently it's 905, so I need to go find some more power moons.
I don't see how that's possible, because I have every power moon, unless...
I mean, does that count the ones in the crazy cap store?
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
That's what I'm thinking.
That person may have bought a whole bunch of moons at some point.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure, like, unless they're super well hidden, I don't see how there could be anything, because the game, like, made a very definitive statement when I got everything. So, I think, in fact, and now that I think about it, my moon count, Roger, sorry, I forgot about this. My moon count may be wrong too, but I did buy a few of those moons at some point, but I thought the game was going to cut me off. It's like, I thought it was gonna be like, oh, you can
Yeah,
buy
it
a
never
certain amount of
does.
moons in each store, and no, you can keep going if you want. So I think about like 3 or 4 moons there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting what the final count is. I guess I could just add it up per level. Anyways, regardless, there is a ton to do in this game, and both of you hit on it here, I think. What makes this game partially so special is the fact that it is so much about exploration. It is a return to that Super Mario 64 style of gameplay. And I've said before, like, a lot of people, even today, a lot of people brought up the fact that, hey, Andre, you didn't mention Sunshine in your review, really, at all. And that's for a good reason, but I felt like Sunshine was already stepping away from the paradigm or the format of Mario 64. Because Mario 64 was really completely open-ended in so many ways, in that you could enter a level and do the objectives in almost any order you wanted to, with a few exceptions. Whereas Sunshine is focused on, it had these like instanced versions of each level where you had to go through them in a linear order. So you get one shine sprite that unlocks the next shine sprite in that level, and so on and so forth. You couldn't, like, you never could see a shine sprite off in the distance and go for that one instead. You always had to get them in a set order. So that's why I like Mario Odyssey, because it's returned to the Mario 64 style where you see something, you can go for it. And there are so many times in this game where I would be sidetracked constantly, again, like Zelda, where I would be focused on one thing, but like, hey, what's that over there? Let me go check that out. And then sure enough, it's like 3 hours later, I still haven't done the next like prime objective or something. And it is that sense of exploration and that sense of discovery that makes this game so rewarding, because it seems like you're rewarded for almost doing anything in this game. You look at an enemy the wrong way, and you'll sometimes get a power moon. I swear to God.
Sit on a bench with somebody, you get a power moon.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. And I've heard some people complain that, hey, they're so frequent, maybe that affects how rewarding they are. I don't think that's the case at all. I find it actually encourages you to really think and, outside the box on how to get these power moons, especially once you start whittling them down. You really have to start putting on your thinking cap on, on how you start obtaining the rest of those moons. And granted, that kind of leads to one of my complaints later on. But for the bulk of the game, I had a blast figuring out what to do and how to get these things.
Yeah, and actually one thing I wanted to touch on too, going back to that Korok seed comparison everybody's making, is you look at the Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild and there's like 6 or 7 different puzzles that just get regurgitated and you solve them on the overworld and that's that. Whereas in this game, yeah, sometimes it's something as easy as, sitting on a bench or capturing an enemy, but other times some of the missions are just as lengthy and beefy as like regular missions that in like Mario 64 or like Mario Sunshine. You'll go through these levels, you have to like capture an enemy, go through a platforming section, maybe jump into a wall, maybe you'll get a secret moon while you're on the way to get that other moon. But some of these moons really do take a long time to get, and I think that's important to note, that it isn't just something that you just like solve a quick puzzle and you get one. A lot of them are like that, but a lot of them still are those like beefy missions that you've come to expect from 3D Mario games, of yore.
I don't think Breath of the Wild actually wanted you to go out and find all the Korok seeds. I think they were meant to be more just rewards for exploring.
Well, I know. Whereas I never wanted to.
Yeah, I never did either.
Odyssey definitely wants you to go out and get all those moons.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there were so many instances where we'll talk about this later, but there are definitely rewards for going out and finding more and more moons, even in the post-game.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I definitely think there's more focus, and even when you've dwindled it down to just a couple of moons left in a kingdom, there's still some kind of structure to it. Like, you can speak to a parrot who will give you a little hint to what the moon is, which is very similar to Mario 64's approach.
I love that comparison you made in your review, by the way, because that is totally on point.
And there's also Hint Toad, who you can pay 50 coins and he'll give you a rough location of where that moon is. Or you can tap an amiibo too, and they'll go out and try and find the moon for you. So, even though these kingdoms are sprawling, there's still definitely a very compact approach to it, and I think it really works.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also like I think it was Roger touching on something with how you always, it's basically always one moon for no matter what you do. Like, it could be a long mission, you get a moon,
yeah.
Or it could be a short mission, you get a moon. There's a few exceptions, you get like the multi-moon for the main, like, primary objectives that the game points you toward. I like that idea. I like the fact that it's basically, you get the same reward no matter what, because it shows that it really encourages further exploration or experimentation, knowing that you're not wasting your time. It's like, oh, I'm only going to get a moon for this, why bother? It's like, no, everything's it's all equal here. And I like that. Like, it kind of leaves it up to you for what you want to go for. Like, no challenge is too small or not worth doing.
I just want to touch on how amazing this game is to speedrun too. I started a new file earlier this morning, just in time for the review, to get in some very quick last-minute footage. And what I did was basically, I didn't go for any of the more linear story moons where it expands the level, apart from when I had to. So in the Sand Kingdom, I didn't go for that first moon on top of the giant pillar. I literally just went around and collected everything I could. And so I went on to the next kingdom without ever even triggering the Broodal's boss battle. I did that in the Lake Kingdom too.
Oh yeah, I actually, come to think of it, I did do that in the Lake Kingdom too. I didn't get the first Brutal battle in the Lake Kingdom, I think, until after I'd already beaten the final boss.
So you can skip so many sequences in this game, and it's going to be a speedrunner's dream, I think. And one of the Nintendo UK guys on Twitter has been posting some of his time trial runs, and he is insanely talented. You can do some crazy stuff with Cappy in this game.
Yeah, I didn't start really making use of Cappy until, I would say maybe, or his, what he can add to your jump abilities until maybe the latter third of the game. Because, yeah, you can perform a long jump, throw Cappy, dive into Cappy, jump again, and then you can toss him again for another extra, little bounce in the air.
Yeah.
And you can link those together, with wall jumps and whatnot, for some really insane distances. And New Donk City is such a perfect place to experiment around with that.
That's interesting that you guys were mentioning the speed run, though, because I kind of want to go back to that. Is I would recommend to people who maybe are like me, who are not hardcore Mario fans, do not speed run this game. I think that is... I'm not going to say you could burn yourself out really easily, because you can't, because I was playing a lot of it, obviously, and I think I have 600 something moons right now, and I'm still not burned out. But at the same time, I think the game obviously wants you to explore, and I think the way you should play the game is to take your time and to actually explore and find everything, at least the first time around. You could speedrun and do stuff afterwards, that's fine, but if you are not a speedrunner, or if you're not a Mario fan, like I said, like me, you're not somebody who's super hyped for every Mario game, I think the best way you should play this game is play it as if it's Breath of the Wild, and you're just exploring, maybe don't go after a specific mission, just walk around the world, see what you could find, look for secrets, capture everything you find, and I think you'll have a blast with it. But then again, that goes to say how great this game is that you could play it either way, right? You could end up speedrunning it, you could go through and explore everything, you could just beat the main story and be done with it, you could play all the post-game stuff and be done with it. There is so much here, and it's sort of like a create your own Mario. I mean, it's not or a make your own Mario adventure almost, because you could go a lot of different directions. Again, it guides you with some of the moons in the earlier parts of the game, but everything after that is pretty much open.
Yeah, I almost want to say the platforming is almost kind of emergent in a way, because there's so many ways to go about any of these tasks in the game. You can see something in the distance and try and figure out your own way up there. You can, try and follow the main path if you want, or as John, you were kind of touching on, you can do something completely different and avoid some of the main encounters in the game. I went back recently to the Luncheon Kingdom when I was trying to 100% the game, and I realized there was a main objective there I completely ignored too, apparently.
Well, that might have been because that wasn't your favorite kingdom, too.
Yeah, that too, exactly. Yeah, I'm I'm done here. I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is a creativity involved in playing this game. It's not just going point to point. It allows you to experiment and play around. Again, very much like Breath of the Wild. But unlike Breath of the Wild, this game is more structured than that. So it still feels like you're working within these parameters, which in a way almost encourages you to be more creative in some ways. Because you're kind of working within this box, but you can try and think outside that box as well.
I think for exploring as well, the life system is really interesting. So there isn't really a consequence for dying. I mean, you lose 10 coins, but that's about it. So the game almost wants you to try and make leaps of faith or whatever you want to do. It doesn't punish you for trying to explore, and I love that a lot.
There's no fall damage.
Oh, yeah,
there is no fall damage, yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, in fact, I would say losing 10 coins is actually more punishing than losing a life in most 3D Mario games. Or most past Mario games.
Coins have a lot of value in this.
They do! Yeah, there's still one or two items in the shop I haven't been able to afford yet. Early on, when I was losing 10 coins, I'm oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. Everything in the shop's pretty cheap. But later on, I'm oh man, I wish I hadn't died all those times. I could have saved all those coins and bought everything now.
And in addition to the regular coins, so you've got the purple coins in each kingdom. And one thing I found myself doing was I don't know about you guys, but I would always go for the souvenir first. I never really cared about the outfit. I would always want the souvenir, so when I go inside the Odyssey, I would see it displayed proudly. And then after that, my order, I would normally go souvenir, costume, and then sticker on the ship. And then once I had the sticker on the ship, I was okay, I've gotten all the moons in the world. I mean, not all the moons. I've gotten all the purple coins. I'm good to go. I could move on to the next location.
So I actually played in very haphazard way, I suppose. Like, I was jumping between levels constantly. Actually, I take that back. When I was first playing the game, I actually went through in a linear order. Like, I would unlock the next level, and I would pretty much move on at that point. Once I beat the game, that's when I started just hopping around completely randomly. I'm like, I'll go check out Cascade for a while, see what I can find there. Once I got tired of it for a little bit, I moved on to the next kingdom. And I actually was terrible with buying those, the souvenirs, Roger. I was buying those, like, at the very end of the game, basically.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, that's so
I was
funny.
on costumes first.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
Exactly. Now, one big element we haven't really touched on too much yet is this game isn't just like a spiritual successor to Mario 64, which it largely is, but it also does many of its own things too. One of which is, of course, capturing, and this is such a major part of the game, because there are no conventional power-ups here. Capturing is basically a new form of the power-up, and in a way, like, completely replaces them. Like, there's no point for power-ups when you have the ability to capture these enemies. And I had a blast with this. Like, it is such a cool idea, being able to take over these enemies' bodies and use their abilities and shortcomings, or, along with their shortcomings, to try and navigate these environments as well. Because it also adds to the discovery and exploration for what you can do in these levels. Like, for instance, like as a quick example, in the, was it the Lost Kingdom or Forgotten Kingdom, I believe? You have those tropical wigglers, which, before I captured one, like, I would see these, like, these collectibles. I'm like, how in the hell do I get to them? Like, it's floating above nothing. Like, there's no way I can get to it. And then you get to the wigglers, like, oh, this is all making sense now. But even then, like, they use them in ways that you really have to think about. It's like, man, how do I even reach those with this guy?
That kingdom, by the way, not to step on what you're saying,
No,
that
go
kingdom
for
is,
it.
I think, one of the best areas in the game. Like, obviously, we're not going to spoil any story things
Right.
here for you guys, but, like, you guys have seen it already in the trailer, so I feel like it's fair to talk about it. That kingdom itself, like, the way you get to it is very surprising, and also, like, what you do in that kingdom is it's cool. It's, like, unconventional, I feel, for, like, a Mario game, for the way you're, like, exploring the world. Normally, if you go through something like, I don't know, Bob-on Battlefield in, like, Mario 64, right, you get to the top of Bob-on Battlefield, you battle a boss, and then, like, you go back to the other mission. And that one, it really did encourage you to explore a lot. Because it was almost like you were stuck on this deserted island, and you're like, all right, how do I get out of here? What can I capture? Yeah, and just like you were talking about with the tropical wigglers, like, how do I get to those moons?
Right.
I need this moon. How do I get to it? And, yeah, the platforming in that world was really fun, too. The gliding mechanic was fun. That's one of my favorite worlds in the game.
I think capturing could have been very overwhelming, but it's not. There are so many different characters you can become, and learning them is instant. Like, there's no learning curve to finding out how you control these guys. I'm not quite sure how they managed it, but it's just so easy to pick up and play each different enemy. And even some of the bigger reveals from the trailers are actually quite early on. Like the dinosaurs in the Cascade Kingdom.
Yeah,
which is
right
one of the
away.
very first kingdoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of brings up a great question real quick. Do you think the trailer showed too much? Because I saw a lot of people with that concern. It's like, have we seen too much of Mario Odyssey? And while I was playing through the game, I was still being surprised constantly. Like, there was new stuff all the time for me, at least. Not necessarily entirely new kingdoms, but tons of stuff within those kingdoms that I didn't see coming.
I think I was sold a long time ago, and they didn't need to keep making trailers.
Well, I mean, I was sold when they announced a new Mario game.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I still were definitely discovering new things, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of wish they didn't show everything off in the trailers, like, because they didn't show everything, to be fair.
didn't.
Like, there's a lot that still has not been seen, and that you can discover for yourselves, but I do feel like there is a lot that they showed, and some of the kingdoms that they showed even just very briefly, I feel like they could have just gotten away with not showing it all.
I think it's kind of crazy. The debut trailer didn't have the capture ability, which is one of the biggest twists in the game.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. I mean, I love that they hid that for so long. And when you look back at the initial reveal, I mean, it's like, oh wow, it's amazing they hid this here. But there's so many opportunities they could have shown it off in the initial reveal. But the fact that they hid that for so long is commendable.
Yeah, even in the original Karen Switch trailer, you know the one I'm talking about, where she's like sitting in her room playing Mario.
I made a 10-minute analysis on that.
Yeah, that exact moment where she's like running up towards that bullet bill, like you can capture that bullet bill and you fly over and you see the rings.
And and in my analysis, I'm like, oh, how are we gonna get those rings? Maybe you can use like that sand spout or something. No, it's a bullet bill.
Yeah.
The answer is right there the whole time. But John, like, I want to go back to something you said with how intuitive these characters are. Like, these captures are almost more intuitive than some of the power-ups Mario's had in past games. Like the spring in Mario Galaxy, for instance, or even the bee, which also weren't necessarily that complicated. But the enemies here, like, you almost feel at one of them instantly, which is very fitting given the fact that Mario's literally taking over their body.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I said something in my review that this game really, you can tell it's been informed by 30 years of game development by Nintendo. Like, this is 30 years of Mario knowledge that they've accrued over the decades that they jam-packed into one single game. We are seeing the culmination of all their efforts so far right here, and I love it. There's so much that this game does that's so extremely polished that I really feel like no other developer could really touch on at this point.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, too, while we're on the topic of capture abilities, too, is the bosses in this game. Because I feel like, yeah, there are still some regular mini-bosses and regular bosses that you fight as Mario, but to me, the most interesting boss encounters in the game were the ones where you battle them as an enemy that you've captured. Where a lot of the time you'll be in a king, like the Wooded Kingdom, for example. When you get to the boss of the Wooded Kingdom, you capture the little, what are the little, like, onion bulb things that grow.
The stretchy things?
The stretchy things, right.
Yeah, I don't know what they're called.
I forgot what they're called. It doesn't matter. But, like, you capture one of them, and then that's how you take on the boss of that kingdom. Or, like, in the Luncheon Kingdom, same thing. You battle the boss of that kingdom, and you take over one of the lava balls. And, like, that made those bosses feel so different from anything that's ever been in a Mario game before. And then what I think is really cool about it is the times that you do battle a boss as Mario, aside from, like, the brutal bunny fights, aside from those fights, all of those bosses are very interesting and bizarre for a Nintendo game, especially one with Mario in it. And so I think they really did a good job of, like, twisting some of the original classic mechanics on their head, but also, like, introducing these new ones, and again, making them feel natural, so then you already feel comfortable enough to take on a boss as one of these characters. It's really something.
I mean, the one that I'm thinking of is in the Sand Kingdom, where you're literally taking over the boss character's fist to ram them into his own face.
Right.
Like, stop punching yourself.
Nintendo just couldn't get away from the staple of floating hands, though. There are so many Nintendo bosses with floating hands.
But they gave it a new twist, so I'll give them credit for that.
Uncle Andros!
I mean, and the captures really, like, beyond just being used as, like, tools for a puzzle, like, they are innately, for the most part, fun to use. I mentioned earlier, it's fun just to get around in this game, whether as Mario by rolling around or jumping up buildings, or as these characters that you can take over, like, and glide around or fly around. Like, using bullet bills is surprisingly fun. And even beyond that, then you have, like, other characters or vehicles, like the Jaxies, for instance, or the scooter in New Donk City. Like, the mere act of locomotion has been made an entertaining mechanic somehow by Nintendo.
Yeah.
On the topic of the scooter, the HD rumble on that thing is incredible.
I wanted to touch on that. Not just that, the HD rumble in general in this game is bloody fantastic. Like, I honestly didn't care about HD rumble at all up until this game. And this game has kind of convinced me. It's like, okay, there actually can be a purpose for this when it's used well.
Yeah, I'm glad that they actually utilized it in this, because prior to this, I think the best other use of HD Rumble was Golf Story.
Right.
And I was like, maybe they shouldn't let an indie developer outstage them in terms of one of the main mechanics of their system.
1-2 switches ball count, that's a good one.
Oh yeah, that's cool
but
too.
Apart from that,
yeah, I mean, the difference, I agree, both of those are good examples. Golf Story uses it very well, but in very limited circumstances. Mario managed to incorporate it throughout the adventure. Like, it actually does add some immersion to the game. Like, if you're on the Odyssey, for instance, you can feel it vibrating. Or same thing with the scooter, as you mentioned, where, like, if you're just idling, you can feel it, you can feel those vibrations coming through the handles, and when you rev up, you can feel that revving up, you can feel that as well through the handles. Or when you're, it's also used as a mechanic when you're looking for stuff hidden in the ground, your controllers rumble. And if you're using the split Joy-Cons in particular, which I think you should, because they work really well in this game, you can actually use a stereo separation of the rumble to figure out where exactly that collectible is hidden in the ground. It's like, oh, I need to go right here. And there's so many other instances in the game. Like, if you're a lava bubble and going through the lava, you can feel, like, the vibration of the lava against your body. It is so well done in this game.
I think you bring up a good point too with like the Joy-Cons detached, because the game even tells you when you boot up the game every single time, hey, why don't you try using the Joy-Cons detached? It might be a better experience for you, and it really does. I feel like that is the ideal way to play the game, which to me, I usually just like play with the Joy-Con grip, or I play with a Pro Controller.
Same, yeah.
But yeah, it's like I was playing this entire game pretty much with the Joy-Cons detached on my TV, and I loved it.
I have kind of gotten used to just using the Pro Controller controller. Like it's a comfortable controller, and I'm like, well, why would I use anything else? And I never really gave split Joy-Cons a chance until Mario, and they've kind of convinced me. I kind of loved having them, like how there's it's like the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, but there's no cord this time. And I was concerned about how small they are and how small the buttons are, and then the travel distance on the joystick is a little bit less than on the Pro Controller. None of that really was an issue. Like, Mario is a game that demands precision, and I was able to do that just fine with the Joy-Cons.
I know some people are a bit upset about motion. Like, there was a thread on Resetera who people were upset that that handheld mode kind of doesn't really have that motion focus, even though you can pull them off in handheld mode. But to me, I think they designed the game around the vanilla abilities of Mario, so just throwing Cappy forward will work for you for pretty much the entire game.
Yeah.
But then motion's kind of like an extension of that, I suppose, so once you throw Cappy out, you can then jolt him forward if you lunge the Joy-Con in a certain direction, or if you sort of push them to the right, you'll kind of go in a circle, throw them up, they'll go up in the air. So motion isn't really needed, but it definitely makes it, what's the word, I guess it enhances it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think it makes some actions easier. For instance, as you mentioned, when you swing the Joy-Cons to the side, you do that 360-degree Cappy attack, which you can do on the Pro Controller as well, but I think you need to spin Mario first before you throw Cappy, at which point you'll do it.
Yeah.
So it's quicker on the Joy-Cons, but it's still completely doable on the Pro Controller. But I agree, I feel like it's an enhancement. Like, motion controls have a stigma now that harkens back to the Waggle era of the Wii. But I think we're at a point now beyond that, where it's not just a simple, you're not just shaking them, it's not just a simple activation always. It's, I don't know, it feels like the developers have come to grips now with them better and know how to incorporate it better. And I think they actually do have purpose in this game. Because I like the fact they can activate something like throwing Cappy without having to take my thumb off the jump button, for instance. Like, you have instant access to jump and dive, as well as being able to use Cappy as well.
One of the things quite interesting about Odyssey's moveset too is there's basically two buttons. There's jump and throw Cappy, and I guess crouch too. And it's remarkable what it does with just those buttons there, just those buttons alone. Like, even the dive is kind of a combination of buttons, that's pressing ZL and Y at the same time. So those combinations are for the more advanced players, I think. You can get through the game just fine, just by jumping and throwing Cappy. My fiancée actually played Odyssey from beginning to end, and she's not a huge gamer. She's played a few games from beginning to end, but not that many. And well, she's right here. What do you think of Odyssey, Roxy? She says she loves it.
Nice, that's awesome. I mean, you're kind of hitting on something right there with that. The fact that this game is really quite accessible for any number of ways, both in terms of how you play with whatever controller you want, but also just in the gameplay sense. Like, the fact that there's so many moons, if there's one that's too tough for you, you can just go for a different moon. There being no fall damage now is, doesn't punish you for trying out, for experimenting. And then there's, if you get stuck on the moons, as you mentioned, you have the parrot and then the toad that'll help you out. And beyond all that, there's also the assist mode, which I completely forgotten about until very near the end of the game, like the post game even, where if you turn it on, it'll guide you to your next objective. It'll give you more health, and then if you fall off a ledge, instead of resetting you, it'll pop you back up in the bubble to where exactly you fell off. So this game, they really went out of their way to make this game accessible to almost anyone. I feel like I could give this game to my dad, who really can't play anything, and he'd be able to handle this game to some degree. It doesn't feel like dumbed down in any way either. Like, this game challenged me at points too. It just gives you enough options that you can work around them if you're not skilled enough to complete that particular task. All right, I guess agree. Yeah. So let's talk about the levels a little bit more. We can't touch on all of them, of course. Some of them are spoilerish. But the one that stood out to me, of course, is the one we've seen basically since the beginning, New Donk City. This has quickly become one of my favorite levels in any Mario game ever. Oh, yeah. And it's a level that has, in the main level itself, there are no enemies at all. You really can't be killed except by jumping off the level itself. And it's just so fun to get around. Like, I love everything about it. I love how fun it is to climb up buildings and jump between them. I love how bouncing off taxis gives you instant airtime. And I love just the setting of the city. Like, I love the fact that this is an actual city, and even the art design, which to me, when it was first revealed, like, I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. I was almost turned off a little bit by the weird mishmash of the real world style combined with Mario. But now that I've played it, I'm like, man, this actually works. Like, I have no problem with it at all anymore.
Yeah, I think New Donk is going to go down in history as, like, one of the most iconic Mario levels of all time, which is funny considering the fact that, like, 2 years ago, if we were like, oh yeah, we're going to have a real life live action Mario level, you'd be like, get out of here.
Right.
It's never going to happen. And if that does happen, I'm going to hate that world.
It's like the Mario movie, The Level, basically.
Right, but it really does work. And like, I also think it's funny because and the whole game does this, but New Donk does it in particularly very well, is it mixes in this whole like theming of Mario in the real world with the goofiness of like special Mario games. Like you have like a great example of this, and it's not a spoiler, you've seen it in the trailers, and so it's fine, is when you go into that one building in New Donk City across from where City Hall is, and you get on the scooter and you're being suddenly chased by the T-Rex City Escape style, and you're like dodging through the boxes and grabbing coins. The T-Rex comes out of nowhere. He's got this goofy little hat on. You're scooting through, you're Mario. You're grabbing these power moons that look so out of place in the middle of this realistic alley, and then you hop out of it, and then all of a sudden you're in like this major city again. You're in like Mario's version of New York. It's just so cool the way they mix all that together, especially like the New Donk City stuff at night. Like, which is actually how you get to New Donk the first time. Like, the first time you're over there, it's nighttime. And all that stuff is really cool, too. Like, the enemies that you capture, even though they kind of look like Mario enemies, they're still, like, a lot grittier than a normal Mario enemy. And the boss of that area is really cool, too. So, yeah, every aspect of New Donk, from the first time you land till that final festival, is just incredible.
I mean, when in the segment you touched on, when you're playing as a tank, it basically turns into a shooter. Like, it's a completely different style of playing the game, and yet it still somehow works. It still feels like Mario, even though you're literally driving a tank called Sherm. So...
I think what's interesting about New Donk is it's not the largest area in the game, but it's so packed. Like, everything is just kind of within jump of another thing. So, the Sand Kingdom, for instance, is huge, but it has a lot of moving around from area to area, whereas New Donk is just all right there. And you can find a moon pretty much every single time you turn the street, and it really is. It's one of my favorites too. It's an incredible kingdom.
You are kind of touching on something right there. New Donk is interesting because you can run across that thing in, I want to say like 20 seconds or something, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, it's not that big in terms of geographical area, but when you're actually in it and exploring it, there's a density there that I was still like after hours there, I was still discovering new things around corners. Like I would come across like alleys or entranceways. I'm like, how have I not seen this before?
Yeah, I think there's an easy answer to that, which is the verticality of the level. It's a much more vertical level than you've ever had in a Mario game before. You're literally climbing up these skyscrapers and going all around them, where normally in a regular Mario game, sometimes there's like high hills or whatever, but it's all relatively spread out, kind of like the Sand Kingdom. Whereas, New Donk, it's condensed. It's like how a city is. It's everything goes up. It doesn't spread out. It goes up because you've only got a limited amount of space. So
that's true. Yeah, I mean, I love that.
Speaking of verticality too, the Seaside Kingdom is one that kind of looks deceivingly small, and then you go under the water, and it's like a whole new kingdom under there.
It really is. And that actually, as well, is one of my favorite kingdoms in the game. It was just a joy to explore that one. Both because it's beautiful, like it is just a great kingdom to look at, but also the capture targets are fun to use. Like whether it's the Cheeps for swimming underwater, or the I forget what they're called, the jetpack guys, where you capture them, you can fly, you can literally like just jetpack around the level, which is a blast, so to speak.
Yeah, that level. I mean, I also like that level in the second half, after you've beaten the boss, and then like the sunset comes out, it's like, oh, it looks so pretty.
I just like playing fetch with the puppy.
I'm playing fetch with the puppy too, it's so fun.
I mean, I really do like how these levels evolve, and that actually is an element they kind of took from... It was in Mario 64 as well, but I think they mostly took it from Sunshine, because those levels were evolving on a like per Sunshine or per Sun Sprite basis or Shine Sprite basis.
Right.
And they kind of carry that over here, where these levels are changing. Like it'll go from like night to day, or fog will lift. There'll be rain in one part, and then even new paths will become available. I really like that because the levels do feel like they're constantly changing, and they even interact with other levels in various ways that I don't want to get too into.
Yeah, save that for part two.
Exactly. But like, I love even that level interactivity, which is something I feel like Banjo-Tooie also kind of touched on. Actually, that kind of brings up a point I want to touch on here. Like a lot of things we're saying, I feel like are things Banjo-Tooie tried to do back in the day, but kind of failed at compared to Mario. Like Banjo-Tooie also had gigantic worlds, but they were an absolute nightmare to navigate. Like if you weren't familiar with them already, they were impossible to get around in any like meaningful way without being confused constantly. Mario, I never really felt confused in Mario. Granted, you have a map, but I barely even had to consult the map that often. Like, these levels just feel intuitive to get around.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons you didn't like Volbono, right? Was because like you felt that it was confusing to get around that area compared
and
to everything else.
That actually is a great that's good to bring up. That actually is one of the exceptions to the rule I'm pointing out here. I found the level to be completely confusing, both because the design, I think, isn't very intuitive. Like, there's all these narrow paths, and I couldn't remember where things were in relation to one another. And the art style didn't really help either. Everything just felt kind of samey. You had like the same vegetables and fruits everywhere, and then the lava. There were like no real landmarks to really keep track of. So that to me is probably one of the weaker kingdoms in the game.
That's funny you brought that up though, because like, to me, that's all the stuff you were saying about Volbono is how I feel about the Lake Kingdom. I think it's like horrendous to travel between, especially because there's literally just like walls everywhere that you can't go up. You have to like swim underneath stuff. There's these tunnels that like you have to traverse through to get to the other side, and eventually they do make it easier to traverse through the other sides without having just like a giant wall in front of you, but you still have to do a bunch of stuff before you do that. And again, there's another kingdom in the game that's water-based, which is the Seaside Kingdom, which we just talked about being one of the best levels in the whole game.
Yep.
And then it makes it feel like, well, why did they even have the Lake Kingdom in the first place? It's like that should have just been part of the Seaside Kingdom.
The Lake Kingdom really does feel like two mini kingdoms that they merged together with that stupid tunnel.
Yeah,
yeah. That I'm not a big fan of that one. It just, I don't know. It wasn't very fun to, or it wasn't. So keep in mind, all my complaints are relative to the other kingdoms. Like I didn't hate any of these kingdoms. I had a good time throughout the game. But yeah, the Lake Kingdom was definitely on the lower end of things there. It just wasn't very fun to get around.
The wooded, oh my god, though, the Wooded Kingdom. Boys, please, let's talk about this for a second. That, I thought...
The music!
Oh my god, everything about it, the music is so good. Like, it's like this weird rock song, but it's also kind of orchestrated, and it's got this cool, like, steam vibe. Oh, I love everything about it. I love the little, like, machine people, the gardener robots or whatever. I love the costumes you get there. I love, like, the dark woods that they showed off in that Treehouse Live event. And when you actually get there, it's horrifying. And, like, there's just so much about that. What, the poison, the piranha plants, the boss that I mentioned earlier, like, the little onion bulb stretchy people, the tanks once again. It's just, like, I love the theming of that world. I think that is one of the most beautifully themed worlds I think in the past decade of Mario games, because it's very different from like any other sort of standard wooded or like robot type area, and they really mixed it into something that's completely unique that again you've not seen in a platforming game before. I love the Wooded Kingdom.
I think the Wooded Kingdom was when I first started trying to exploit the game, because there are walls that are just sort of barely high enough that you can kind of like backflip off of, then do a little jump, and then throw Cappy, and then jump off that. And it's such like there's so many different ways to traverse this kingdom too. Obviously, you mentioned the depths with like the dinosaur down there too. But yeah, there's so many different parts to this level, and so many different ways to try and get to those parts too. And it really is just so well designed. It's an incredible level.
And the other reason I like it, I think, too, is because it connects one of the things I loved about New Donk City to something that would not normally have verticality, which is a forest level. Whereas, like, in this Wooded Kingdom, you are climbing up these giant, steam garden buildings. Everything looks steampunk. And at the same time, you're climbing up these giant trees that wouldn't look out of place in Washington State. I'm wondering if, like, the development team went over to, like, the redwood trees and we're like, oh, yeah, this is totally what we're going to base this level around, because it is just awesome.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, because, yeah, Nintendo's two main, like, U.S. offices are in Redmond, Washington, like, in the Pacific Northwest, and then the other is in Redwood City.
Redwood City, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would not be surprised if that were the case. And not only though, Roger, the level is very vertical based, like New Donk City, which is really fun how they layer it in that way, a little bit different than how they did in New Donk. But also, it goes the opposite direction too, with the deep underground.
Yes.
Where it's such a cool idea. Where if you jump off at any point in the level, you end up in this weird underground area that has an amazing, for me at least, atmosphere. Like, I was legitimately freaked out with that T-Rex walking around down there, because he's actually quite menacing, and like I was like trying to avoid him. Like I was almost playing like a Metal Gear game. Like I was walking around stealthily, like hiding behind boxes, trying to keep away from that guy.
I think what's quite interesting there as well is in the Cascade Kingdom, the dinosaurs are kind of friendly. Like there are friends who we can capture.
Right.
And then all of a sudden there's this like aggressive one, and you don't really know what to do at first.
Yeah, you don't.
And I think that's also one of the first parts where it teaches you that something wearing a hat can't be captured.
Yeah,
'Cause I think that
that's right.
dinosaur's wearing like a top hat or something.
So he is right, and you're kind of hitting on something that I've been thinking about, in just how well Nintendo like nailed the capture mechanic in general, like the visual like clarity of it, and how like what a brilliant idea to have these enemies wearing hats to signify that, hey, you need to attack these guys first before you can capture them. Like, it's such a simple idea, but one that makes so much sense that, you know, you wonder, like, would another developer have thought of that? You know, but just throw a hat on them if they need to be a little bit tougher, then,
Yeah.
you know, you can't capture them instantly.
I don't know about you guys, but during the E3 demo, I kind of felt that some of the captures were a bit iffy, and it's very interesting to see how they've refined it in the final build. Like, in New Donk, there's a guy who's sort of using a remote control car, and that was so hard to control in the E3 build. But it's so natural now.
I was wondering that. I'd heard those complaints, but I hadn't actually tried it myself. But when I played in the final game, I'm like, oh, this isn't that bad. It's like an actual RC car.
Yeah.
So did they actually change that? Was that actually worse in the
in the E3 build, the steering, like, barely worked. You'd have to sort of bash into walls to try and turn around.
Right. Wow. Well,
Yeah,
I'm glad they
it's
fixed that.
interesting to see how it progressed.
Yeah.
I think, too, they may have improved the scooter. Because I remember that looking a little bit janky in the E3 demo, whereas in the final game, it seemed to be fine, like when you're doing your turns, for instance.
I don't
Yeah.
remember. I think the majority of my footage was on the scooter too, so I actually don't remember. I should go back and look at that old footage from like the first time they let us record the Metro Kingdom and then compare it to like what we have now.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Any other, like, kingdoms that stood out to you guys that you want to touch on that's not a spoiler?
I was gonna say, not that we can't spoil. There's two in particular that like I'm like dying to talk about right now, but we can't. So
Yeah, there's definitely one that I can't talk about right now.
So there's another aspect of this game that I want to touch on, and that's the fact that it feels like they made Mario a little bit more cartoony in this game, with how he kind of like bounces around, like his dimensions are changing constantly, like when he's, you know, jumping or squatting. How
His
his
nose.
his
Yeah.
nose, yeah,
his nose has
basically-
Camilla's boobs. Jiggle physics. That's literally.
It is. It's got like nose physics now.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, like when you go swimming underwater, how his cheeks like bulge out from all the air he's trying to hold on to. And I wonder, like, if that was, you know, it's an interesting direction for Nintendo, especially how it now stands out in even starker contrast to New Donk City. So I wonder if that, you know, I just wonder like how that signifies the direction it's taking Mario in, like in a slightly more cartoonish, you know, less serious direction. Especially given the fact that the story, I feel like, kind of falls back on the Tales of Old Time, the princess gets kidnapped, as opposed to like the more like epic galactic nature of Mario Galaxy. This almost feels like a more like taking it back to like a more Saturday morning cartoon style approach. Not quite to that degree, but
And do you know one thing I really love about how expressive Mario is I can't believe we haven't mentioned this yet either, photo mode.
yeah.
You can get Mario in so many different expressive animations, and I think if he were just sort of like a sterile face with no movements, many of these pictures would be very boring. And the fact that you can sort of manipulate how Mario looks opens up so many possibilities. And a photo mode is just incredible. I've spent like maybe a couple of hours just taking pictures in this game. Like as Roger mentioned earlier, the sunset in the Seaside Kingdom, that had me there for like half an hour just snapping shots.
That was me
with the dog.
yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, no, I used the snapshot feature to make the thumbnail for my review. I mean, I literally,
Yeah, me too.
I went to the Seaside Kingdom, I put on the outfit that I wanted, and I took the picture. So I actually think it'll be really funny to see, like, once the general public gets their hands on the game, like, what weird things are going to come out of that. Like, you know, somebody out there is going to do one of those Evangelion opening memes, but they're going to do it, like, with Mario characters. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. Like, someone's going to redo the opening of the Evangelion anime, but with all different snapshots from Mario and, like, different footage from Mario Odyssey.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very un-Nintendo-like feature. Like, it's more like something from Uncharted, from the Uncharted games.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
also fantastic in that. And it's really cool to see. I mean, it seems like Nintendo's slowly embracing the social media era. You know, especially now that we've had the Mario Odyssey photo mode and now the video recording feature as well. Like that 1-2 punch right there. That just makes it so easy to share things from the Switch.
Yeah. I mean, Breath of the Wild had that sort of selfie thing. And I wish they would just put in Mario Odyssey's photo mode into Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
And it's so good.
I mean, that's a feature that they also had introduced, the selfie mode in Wind Waker, and I had a blast with that, or Wind Waker
That's
HD,
true.
I should say. So here's something in this game, because for as much of a return to Mario 64 that it is missing one key feature from that game, I felt, and that is the hub. There's no true hub in this game. Instead, they use a world map feature that I think is pretty much like what they did in Mario Galaxy 2, where you have this spaceship that just takes you to, level to level, whichever level you want. Roger, I know you have some thoughts on this, because we talked about this a little bit before, I think, in the past few days.
Yeah, it's funny, though, because, like, it didn't really bother me until the later half of the game, because you don't really think about it. You're going to all the different environments. It's when you're actually traversing between the levels over and over again where it's like, oh, okay, now I actually wish there was a hub world here. And it is a weird omission, considering that, like, 64 and Sunshine are very clearly the real predecessors to this game, and both of those games had, giant hub worlds in their own right. And so it is bizarre that there isn't one here, but at the same time, and we can talk about this in part 2, I feel like they kind of do something to remedy that later on. I'm obviously not going to talk about it here for spoiler reasons, but...
Right, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
For me, in Mario Galaxy 2, I was missing that big sprawling hub. In Odyssey, though, I didn't really miss it at all. I think it's just because the levels are so large within themselves that you're already going around and exploring and wandering to your own free will, that I didn't really feel like I needed a hub.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't either. I felt like I had enough exploration to deal with already. I mean, essentially, when you think about it, the hubs really are just another level anyway. So, not having one doesn't really impact the experience that much when you already have these open-ended levels that really effectively are almost all hubs in their own way.
Yeah.
So especially with how the levels like interconnect in some ways. Yeah. So I thought I might miss it, but I didn't find it to be a big deal, and I kind of liked what they did with the Odyssey anyway. I think it made sense in this game not to have a hub and to have the Odyssey just take you from location to location. Like it really, I mean, thematically it made sense to have the spaceship as opposed to, some central location where you, I guess, would warp to these other countries or whatever, or kingdoms. Alright, well, I think I have some questions here from some people we can go through. Again, no spoilers here, but I think there's some general topics we can touch on that some people are wondering our thoughts on. So this one comes to us from @twip98, who asks, do you think some of the level terrain reminds you of Super Mario 3D World? And that's something I've heard from some people, from a couple people, and I'm trying to think of it, and like for me, no. Like if anything, the terrain reminds me of Mario Galaxy.
Same.
Like, I definitely,
totally.
I definitely like more, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not feeling 3D World from this. Yeah. I mean, 3D World had that one level that kind of tried with the large sandbox-ish setting, and even that doesn't remind me of Odyssey at all.
Wait, the flat plane one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can get like what that person's talking about with like the rounded edges of a lot of the squares, because like there are areas in Toast Arena where like we even thought that at first. Remember when we talked about this back in the discussion when we first saw like 10 seconds of this game, and we were like, is this like a 3D World-like game, or is it actually like Mario 64? Because remember in that original trailer, he was only running straight. He wasn't running in like a weird direction, and so people were still wondering like, is this a 3D World type game? But no, I totally agree with what Andre just said, is a lot of the terrain actually really does remind me of Galaxy, especially some of the 2D, like in the wall stuff really reminds me of Galaxy.
How have we not talked about
that?
Yeah,
because that, like, a lot of that reminds me of Galaxy.
There is so much to talk about in this game, really. Those 2D segments are brilliant.
Yes.
I love them. Because they're not just cool little fun segments, which they are, but they're also like often a means to, like they're also kind of a form of transportation. Like you use one to get somewhere else. And it's such a creative way to get around. And I love how you can see these, like I love how they map these 2D stages to the 3D environment, and how like the stages are actually kind of like built around that idea. How you can go around a corner to reveal a whole new part of this stage, and how they can hide secrets around there, for instance.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this back to my fiance's playthrough, because she doesn't binge on trailers like we do and watch all the coverage. So discovering the 2D sections...
Or spend hours analyzing them.
Yeah, so discovering the 2D sections was completely new for her.
Oh, wow.
And seeing her reaction to it was actually quite interesting. Because, it's been, like, we've known about this for a long time, but... it's just incredible what they are and what they've achieved with this, and how cool it is, how cool the transition from 3D to 2D is. Especially like there's this one section in the Sand Kingdom where there's this bit you can exit from, and the bullet bills come out with you, and they come out 3D from the 2D plane, and it's incredibly cool.
I love that. Like that how the two dimensions interact with each other.
Oh man, there's just so much about this game that I love. There really is. Like there's so much cool, unique stuff that's in the game. But yeah, going back to what we were talking about, I'm reminded more of Galaxy than I am of 3D World. And something I mentioned right at the beginning of this. Again, I'm not a huge Mario fan, but I loved, from the very first time I played Galaxy, I loved Galaxy, and that is how I felt playing Mario Odyssey. Whereas I turned on 3D World for the first time and I was like, oh, this music is amazing. I'm not going to beat this game. I don't care. And I just stopped halfway through. And then it took me like years to actually go back and beat 3D World again, and I ended up playing it with a friend because it just does not speak to me. Like, if you compare and I know I'm going to get hate for this in the comments already, I know, but like, if you look at 3D World and then you compare it to something like this, or like Galaxy, or even Sunshine or 64, it is literally a different league. Like, you cannot compare them at all. Like, this is so much better in literally every single aspect. And I'm sorry, 3D World lovers. Like, you could like it. I'm not hating on you for liking it. I'm just telling you that's how I feel. This is better.
I mean, I don't disagree. I 100% agree with that. I mean, they're fine. They're fine games.
Sure.
Well, actually, maybe. I'm not that big a fan of 3D Land. 3D World I actually did enjoy, but at the same time, I agree. Like, I never got excited for it. I mean, it definitely never like resonated with me emotionally, like Mario 64, Galaxy, or now Odyssey has.
No, I know I definitely spent more time listening to 3D World soundtrack than I did actually playing 3D World.
Actually, here's something we haven't really touched on yet, Roger. Like, both you and I don't know how you felt, John, but Roger and I had like emotional reactions to this game.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There were parts where like my eyes are tearing up. This game was so beautiful in so many ways at times. I'm like, holy crap, I cannot handle this right now.
We cried at the same portion. We DM'd each other about the. I was like, holy shit! I just. Oops. Can I swear on Game Explain? Of course I can. Doesn't matter.
You can now.
I was like, literally. I was crying, man. That really hit me, especially because that moment we're talking about is built up to throughout the entire course of the rest of that level. So then when you finally get to it and you're exploring everything and the music swells up, it was just like, it really, it created a visceral reaction inside myself. It was amazing.
I guess we'll check that out in part 2.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in part
exactly.
2.
We'll touch on more of that soon. But, I mean, it kind of speaks to the whole point, though, of there is a divide between... I mean, the 3D Land and 3D World basically, to me, are 2D games in a 3D space.
Yes.
They took the mechanics of New Super Mario Brothers or any of the 2D games and put it into a 3D environment. And they're fine, but they're not what I personally want out of a 3D Mario game. Mario Odyssey is. And to me, like, Mario Odyssey now joins the ranks of, like, basically, like, the trilogy of my perfect, like, 3D games, which is 64, Mario Galaxy, and now Mario Odyssey. Basically, every 10 years, it seems, we get an amazing... like, it's super amazing Mario game. And the fact I can give it that level of praise is saying something.
I would be okay with a 3D World-ish game now, but on the Wii U, I think I wanted that big 3D sandbox Mario.
Yeah.
And it's a great supplement game, but this is just in a whole other league.
You bring up a good point with that. Like, I would totally be down now for, like, a 3D World sequel on Switch, where we have the 2 Joy-Cons and we can just play with each other, because, again, we already got, like, our main... core, revolutionary 3D Mario game. So if they do want to do something small, I'd even be down for... I never thought I would ever be able to say this, but, like, I'd even be down for, like, a new Super Mario Brothers game on Switch. Would be cool. Like...
Okay, no, I'm gonna cut you off right there. We've had enough new Super Mario Brothers. No more, please. I'm fine if they want to do more 2D stuff. Just
Mario Maker. God. You know what? Just make Mario Maker. Do a Mario Maker and then a sequel to Odyssey, or maybe a Galaxy 3. Do that.
Where's Mario Maker 2?
There you go.
So, I mean, I guess here's something I want to touch on real quick. Do you think they could do something like they did with Mario Galaxy 2? Like, build another game, like a quick game, reusing ideas and maybe assets from Mario Odyssey, just in a whole new way? Or, no, maybe not a whole new way, but make a whole new adventure, rather.
I feel like could we save this question for part 2?
Okay, maybe we should.
Yeah, I think this is actually specifically something I want to talk about in part 2. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Alright, well, I've got another question here from Ahmed, who asks, do you think the capping mechanic could slowly replace... power-ups, or rather allow for power-ups to fade away in future Mario games? Yes or no?
So, is Cappy here to stay is the question, I guess.
Exactly.
I don't know.
It's tough, right? Like, I could see it going either way. Like, I don't think this is the end of Cappy. This kind of ties in the previous question a little bit. I could definitely see, like, a Mario Odyssey 2, but I also don't think power-ups are gone. I think they'll come back at some point, if not even the next game.
It's interesting to think, where do we go from here? I mean, Mario Odyssey feels like they put all their chips on the table, and yeah, I honestly don't know where they go after this one.
We'll need another new goofy sidekick, right? We had Flood, now we have Cappy, and we'll have somebody else next game.
That is a perfect segue, actually, into another question then, from J2XP, who asks, how does Odyssey succeed where you feel Sunshine falters? So I don't know fully how you both feel about Sunshine. I'm pretty well known for not being a fan at all of that game. Even if on paper there are many similarities between the games, but Odyssey. I was actually thinking about this recently too. Odyssey feels like what they wanted Sunshine to be. Like, this is a much more polished version of Sunshine, like extremely polished. Sunshine to me felt incredibly rushed. You can tell they tried to just get that game out the door. They needed Mario on the GameCube stat, and that game had like an epically short development time by Mario standards, to the point where like the reveal for it had almost nothing in common with the final game. Like, we saw an entirely new level, and it was revealed like what, less than a year before it came out, I think. So
Space World,
so they dramatically changed that game in that short time frame, and it's fine if you like that game. I know a lot of people are fans of that game, totally fine by me. For me though, like it felt like a huge step back from Mario 64 for reasons I already touched on, with it going in a more linear direction than Mario 64, with it not being open-ended in how you can go about these challenges. But also, like, I felt the presentation in Odyssey is just so much better. You don't have an obnoxious sidekick character like he did with Flood. I actually like Cappy. I actually like the little commentary he adds every now and then without being obnoxious in how he goes about it. The level design feels great. You don't feel punished for exploring like I felt you were in Sunshine. There's no equivalent to, or there's no equal to the blue coins in this game. I was never that annoyed going for any task or for any collectible here. And then there's also something I don't want to get into yet, but being the final encounter, which I think is infinitely better in this game than in Sunshine.
Oh yeah,
so.
yeah.
And I think to an extent, Cappy kind of replicates Flood's abilities in some points.
Well, like with the flowers you can get. That give
exactly,
right.
And in the Wooded Kingdom, you can clean up those piles of goo too.
Well, even too, like the jetpack octopus people.
Yeah,
like that's literally Flood. You jet forward and you jet up, which is the rocket mechanic in the. Well, actually, the rocket mechanic works both ways in Sunshine, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, I mean, the Seaside Kingdom feels like something that could have been in Mario Sunshine.
Definitely.
It does feel like the spiritual successor to that game.
I think that's why I liked it, though, was because it was like Sunshine. And I think one thing that they built upon, I don't know necessarily if it was like something that Sunshine lacked that then Odyssey like made better, but one thing that Sunshine started, which we talked about already, is like that after you got a certain number of shines, the world itself would change, and like the objectives and actually sometimes like the geography of the level would change, and that happens in this as well.
Exactly.
Only difference is like the way it sort of locks out is with the multi-moons instead of like just regular power moons. So the multi-moons kind of act like shines, and then once you get a multi-moon, then the level changes, and then you get another multi-moon and the level changes again. So yeah, I love that. I hope that's something they honestly carry over into whatever they do next, because that was one of the things I loved about Sunshine, and I was so happy they brought it back here.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting about both games is they both have very free form movement. So, but they also have a crutch too. So, Sunshine's crutch is Flood, being able to sort of hover in the air, and Odyssey has Cappy. Like, it's got like an evolution of Galaxy Spin, I suppose. And but both of them are probably the most freeform 3D Mario games. Like, both 64 and Galaxy are kind of, the movement's a bit slower, I suppose, a bit more tighter, whereas these two allow you to really go for it. But I think Odyssey just feels so much more polished as a general.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it really does feel refined across the board, like that they just polished almost everything in this game to a degree I haven't really seen much before. Well, I have another gaming comparison here. In another question from someone, from Gags Gaming, they ask, how would you rate it as compared to Yooka-Laylee if you have played both? So, have either of you played Yooka-Laylee?
I have.
Yep.
My problem with Yooka-Laylee mirrors my problem with Banjo-Tooie, in that it's too large, too ambitious, and I don't think it makes good use of its space. Odyssey, on the other hand, I think makes perfect use of its space. I think it knows when to be small, it knows when to allow you to stretch your legs, and not every kingdom is sprawling just for the sake of it. Like, some of these are comparable to maybe Mario 64 levels, in size at least.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, I really like how they vary up the amount of collectibles even. Some kingdoms have like 60, some have 50, some have 20.
Yeah, I think the way I would compare them is Yooka-Laylee reminds me of a giant McMansion in the suburbs, where some family got a lot of money and they were like, you know what, we want to build a house, but then they didn't know how to furnish the house, and so it's just big and empty. And then Mario Odyssey reminds me of like that same family going, well, we don't need to live in the suburbs with this giant mansion. We could just be happy living in an awesome condo downtown. And so they buy a condo downtown in one of the nicest cities in the world, and they fill it up with all the coolest stuff. They've got an awesome entertainment center with a Switch. They've got like this beautiful kitchen with an island in the middle and this special like you know what I'm saying? Like it's like it's
going so far with this analogy.
I know, but it's like it's a decked out condo versus like an empty McMansion in the suburbs.
I kind of love that analogy. I mean, it does feel like Yooka-Laylee felt unfocused. It wasn't quite confident what it wanted to be. It had like the right ideals. Like I appreciated their ambition. They just didn't have maybe the time or the refinement needed to get there. Like the worlds are big, but that's not all you need to make a game good. They were confusing to navigate. They weren't fun to navigate. Like Yooka-Laylee weren't that fun to control, whereas Mario was a blast to control. That game also had transformations, like a little bit like Cappy, but those transformations weren't fun to use either for the most part. So Mario Odyssey really just succeeds where that game I felt failed. I was not a fan of Yooka-Laylee at all. I couldn't even finish that game. So I think it's a good thing that game came out when it did, because there's no way anyone would give it any attention now.
Wow, it's still not on Switch yet.
That's true. That's
Very
not good.
soon. Very soon.
Tryfish is asking, what was your favorite capture target? For me, I think it has to be, I forget their name, the water guys though. They can blast around. They're just so fun.
Yeah, they are fun. They are fun.
I don't want to spoil any, but
okay, so maybe that's a good part 2 question then. But
trying to think of an early one. I actually just like bullet bills in general. Really.
Yeah,
I love flying around with them.
I like how they have the time element too. So if you're going fast, you have to. It's a risk versus reward type thing. Like how fast do you want to go to get, how far can I go without running into something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, my absolute favorite one is definitely something that we should save to spoilers.
Okay.
But I think I wonder if you guys are thinking the same one. I don't know, but like,
I think I might.
yeah.
Be.
But the I guess in the levels that you guys have already seen, I like the Cheep Sheeps, honestly. Like, I know that's kind of weird, but like, I like that you don't have to like get those air bubbles. You can just swim around and explore the cool corridor of like Seaside, or even in the Lake Kingdom. It's fun. That's one of the best aspects of the Lake Kingdom, is like just doing fun things with the Cheep Cheep. And then if you hold down B when you jump out of the water, they do the little Free Willy jump. I think they're pretty cute. I like the little Cheep Cheeps.
All right. Noah asks, is it better than Super Mario 64?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. No. No. I think no. Andre, don't go. Oh,
So no. I'm just trying to think of how to explain this, because there's 2 answers to this question. I feel like there is your first time playing the game, and then there's how both hold up now. And if
That's
I'm
a good
answering
point.
how they hold
There
up
you go.
now, I think Mario Odyssey. I mean, I think it's a clear winner. I think Mario Odyssey is going to make it hard to go back to Mario 64 now, which is a game I could previously go back to no problem, because there really was no other Mario game like it. Now there is, and that's going to make it much harder. However, if I'm treating it as like my first time with the game, I still have to give the edge to Mario 64. I said before, I don't think we'll ever see a game, for me at least, on the level of Mario 64. That game was profound when it came out. And for as great as Mario is, it obviously takes much of that from Mario 64, which is really a compliment to how good that game was for its time. So on a first time basis, Mario 64 will probably forever be the ultimate game that will never be topped. But Mario Odyssey is amazing in its own right, and will make going back to that game very difficult.
It's weird because we touched about this earlier too. Is with the Mario games. Like, to me, again, as somebody who's not like a hardcore Mario fan, it just seems like they keep getting better. Like, at least the ones where they actually try, not like the 3D World games, but like that, like the other ones. Like, it actually feels like they just progressively get better. Because Galaxy 2 is also amazing. Like, all of those games are all really good, and yeah, it's just like, it does make it hard to go back to the old ones if you're not a super hardcore fan, but I totally get what you're talking about in terms of like the first impression of the world. And I guess, yeah, if you're going from that aspect, I think 64 probably does still top it. But I think in terms of like the quality of the game itself, playing it in 2017, Odyssey is, of course, hands down the winner.
I mean, they've had 20 years of game development knowledge since then, yeah.
Yeah, judging them both all in a vacuum, I think I actually prefer 64 over Galaxy, I think. But when comparing it to Odyssey, I don't know. I just think Odyssey has incredibly well-designed kingdoms.
It does.
I think the mechanics trump Mario 64's. And
Don't use that
really,
word
I just
around
think
here.
Odyssey just brings everything together perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's tough to compare some of these games, especially with Roger. You're kind of touching on with the Galaxy and how you think it improved upon the past ones. I mean, I love Galaxy. I love Galaxy 2. I put them almost right up there with Mario 64, or I mean, I put them really right up there with Mario 64 and Odyssey. But they never replaced them for me because they are still different games to me. Like, the platforming is similar by itself, but Galaxy games are largely linear, whereas Mario was, Mario 64 was about exploration. So, I mean, for me, it's very interesting when you look at the whole Mario series as a whole, even including the 2D games. I feel like going from the original Mario up to Mario 64, it's like a linear line of increasingly being more about exploration. You add Mario 3 introducing the world map. Mario World built upon that with being a whole world and it being interconnected. And then Mario 64 took it to a whole new degree, a whole new dimension even. And then from that point, though, they started shrinking it. Yeah. Mario Sunshine had similar sized levels, but they went more linear. Mario Galaxy went even more linear yet, even if it was fantastic. And then they went to the logical limit of that with Mario 3D Land and 3D World being essentially 2D games in the 3D space. Now Mario Odyssey is going back to that Mario 64 style, that tentpole level of freedom. The fact that we can have this discussion, though, about a 20-year game and how it compares to a modern one is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does just show how influential 64 is. Yeah. And it's still a great game to this day, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I think it's still one of my favourite games, but for me, Odyssey just about knocks it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing game. Like I said, we gave it a whole new review score we've never used before. So, and it's actually one that we've actually had in mind from the very beginning. We've just never had an opportunity to use it until now.
Oh, wow.
So, Mario Odyssey truly is something special.
Wow, you didn't even use it on Breath of the Wild. That is saying something.
I didn't give Breath of the Wild our previous top score being loved. I gave it like it a lot. I actually was on the lower end of reviews in general.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I had a great time with the game, but it had some major issues for me that kind of permeated the entire experience that Mario Odyssey doesn't have.
Game of the Year is going to be fun this year with Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Persona 5, Cuphead, Sonic Mania. We got like Samus Returns. This year has been amazing for games. I feel like this, to me, going back to what we were talking about with Mario and like 20 years ago to now, it's like this year feels to me like a 96, like a 98. Like one of those really defining years where they just reveal all this stuff and all these games come out on all these platforms that do either revolutionary things or things that are so different, so vastly different from things we've seen in anything in the same genre that it's just like, it's an exciting time to be a gamer, even if you're not just like a Nintendo fan. Obviously, it's an amazing year to be a Nintendo fan because you've got Mario and Zelda and Splatoon and everything, and we're getting a Pokemon in a couple weeks too, but like, for everybody else, I still think it's an awesome year.
I agree with that. Yeah, it's been an amazing year. I think 2017 is going to go down in the record books as one of those like hallmark years of gaming that had so many freaking good games, like 1998 with Half-Life, Ocarina of Time, and StarCraft, I believe, plus others.
Grim Fandango.
How crazy is it too that we've had both a groundbreaking Zelda game and a groundbreaking 3D Mario game in the same year? Like, not even the N64 had that. The N64 had, like, a 2-year gap between them.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me worry about next year, to be honest. Because, like, to be honest, I'm actually not worried because I think, like, Kirby and Yoshi and Fire Emblem and potentially, well, maybe not Metroid, but, like, Pokemon for sure. And maybe Smash, Animal Crossing, Smash.
Smash has to be next year.
Yeah, it has to be. Definitely.
I'm convinced of it.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know anymore because I think if they... I guess this goes into like that question from earlier, which we'll save to part 2, which is that if they end up doing DLC for Mario Odyssey, I could see them even building that out to like early spring, having like Yoshi and Kirby sort of round out the spring, play through all the stuff that was released last year, in summer release some like big relaxing game like Animal Crossing, and then the holiday launch Pokemon. I think that could work for them. And then Fire Emblem too, like the main line, not Warriors, but like a real Fire Emblem game is coming next year too, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're kind of getting off topic a little bit.
Yeah,
we're missing that big tentpole game for the early half of next year to look forward to.
Yeah.
But maybe it will be DLC or something. But that's all stuff for part 2.
Yeah.
And in fact, maybe it sounds like it might be almost time for that. So, do you guys have any final thoughts you want to throw out there before we wrap up part 1 fully?
This is a good game.
Yeah,
it is a good game.
It's a good game.
Like, this game. I mean, I said in my review, this is the kind of game that doesn't come along every day, let alone maybe once every few years even. This is a special type of game. If you're looking forward to this game, try and avoid as much as you can. Like, in fact, if you've listened to this discussion already without playing it, you may have messed up. Actually, no, I'm joking. I think we've done a pretty good job not spoiling it too much. But yeah, like, this is a game you should just sit down and enjoy it. Like, enjoy it for what it is. It's not something that comes along very often. So, and who knows how long it'll be until we have another game of this caliber. And the fact that, yeah, we had also Breath of the Wild this year really is remarkable. Alright, well I think that wraps up for part 1 here. So, Roger, do you want to tell people where they can find you at?
Sure, you can find me at RogersBase on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram, and I just posted up my Mario Odyssey review, which has new footage, but is also spoiler-free. So if you still aren't sure after listening to our discussion and watching their reviews, go watch my review.
Definitely should. How about you, John?
You can find me on Twitter at Normcoms, where I tweet about Nintendo Switch stuff, and also on YouTube, where I review Nintendo Switch games and do general coverage, including a Mario Odyssey review too.
Definitely check it out, and you'll find links to all of that in the description below. And of course, make sure to stay tuned to Game Explain for lots more on Super Mario Odyssey and everything else Nintendo as well. And of course, stay tuned for part 2 coming up very soon. Catch you later. Bye.